I was ripped from my relatives, my culture, my language, several times, from Rwanda to Burundi to Kinshasa, and then to the United States, and from New York City to Indiana. Very different culture, by the way. My father's in Africa, and I told them my whole story, and so they sent me to the psychiatrist. They thought I was crazy. So the psychiatrist sat me down, gave me these patterns to look and study. And said, "What do you see here?" I say, "Oh, I see a war. I see an African war." And I would tell these stories because I'm an artist, you know. And then the guy was like, "You take notes. So tell me about your father again." "Well, he's disappeared. He's a journalist." "And about your mom?" "Well, yeah, she's from Rwanda. She's running away from the Hutus." And so eventually, the only thing he could do is say, his evaluation was like, "This kid is pretty balanced, but his story is extraordinary." So the only thing that he recommended was that they call the FBI. So the FBI did an investigation, and they did a stakeout of that house. And they're like, "This kid's story is corroborated. Don't send him home." And I was like, but they didn't tell me that, right? So I'm thinking, guys, I just got to go home, you know. So they let me go home. And when I got home, they were like, "Where have you been?" You know. And I just told them I was sick. I was in the hospital. Nobody came to see me. And unbeknownst to me, that they had wired the place and they were planning a raid. We went to school, my brothers and I, and then when we came back, there was a SWAT truck in front of the apartment. There was guys being marched into the truck. They had roped off the entire street. So we went under the ropes and walked towards our house. And the police officer said, "You guys live here?" I said, "Yeah." "Are you the Camaras?" "Yeah." "Oh, do you have a place you can go? Because we can't go in here." "No, where are we going to go?" You know. And they said, and then I thought of this guy. You know, I had his number, and I called him. And I said, "We need a place to stay." And he said, "Well, I don't have a place I can let you stay, but you can call the youth pastor, and he has a place." So we immediately got back in the church again. This sort of pattern I was telling you about, back in the church. And the pastor called the Child Welfare Bureau, and then they took my mother to court. Apparently, and this is why I'm so thankful, is that when my mother was in the they had been following the story, and then they kind of realized my mother was being used. And so they waited till she was out of the house. They waited till the children was out of the house, and then they raided. So it was a very smart agent who kind of figured out that this family is being victimized. So it was I was very thankful that my mother, because a couple of guys were killed in that. There was a gun battle in the house, and there was blood everywhere. So my mother happened to be in the hospital for a stomach cramp, and they went in. So my life changed again, and during this time, we became foster children. My mother was taken to court, and she was found to be an unfit mother, and she was going to be deported, but they couldn't send her back to her country because civil war, you know. It's like, and she had immunity, but they also saw that it wasn't a criminal case; it was just a family case. So they took us away from her. It's like it killed her, you know, to take your children away from you. But I saw it as a continuing part of my journey. I stayed in school. I pursued an education, and I got into the State University of New York, and I studied film there. And I was pretty much independent from that point on, from the time they took us away from my mother. And I sort of made a commitment that I was going to sort of make this American journey worth the efforts of both my parents. But there's a spiritual aspect of that said I was fortunate. From the time I was allowed to live in the hospital room where I could have died, well, I was dead, to when that snake could have gotten me. Various points in my life I saw, like in the movie Ben-Hur, where the Christ would appear at different points when his needs was great. You know, what's a leader? The greatest example of leadership value to me was Christ. It's hard to use Christ as an example of leadership in our modern setting, but Martin Luther King was a follower of Christ, but he exhibited those values in the modern day. To me, a great leader is someone who is a continuing student of life, of human behavior. I see a lot of people given a leadership position, but they don't have those core values, and therefore they can't get people to follow them. They have to force them to follow them. And so with John, for instance, he said, "Follow me." Christ said, "Follow me," to his disciples, right? So I see that if you can separate the religious aspects of who Christ was to the fact that true leadership strength has to do with real core values as a person. In other words, how do I value life? And one of my mentors was a great filmmaker who gave James Earl Jones his first role. He helped. He was a mentor to Francis Ford Coppola, and he was my professor. His name was Aram Avakian. Aram Avakian made a comment that I never forgot. He said, "I never fire anybody. I never fire anybody." He says, "I just make them work. I get them to follow me." And I thought, wow, you know, how hard is it to not fire someone, but to motivate them to follow. And I remember, because I was working on a project and I wanted to fire a couple of people, and he instilled in me that if they're not following, you're failing, not them. I have a family. I have 10 children. I have 5 boys and 5 girls. My children are homeschooled. It's a fellow by the name of John Ewald. John Ewald had been an executive with J.C. Penney. He had been very successful, and one of the things that happened when he would go into a store, he would raise their standard high, and then the revenues would grow. So if there was a struggling store, they would send him there, and then he would just bring it up to a profitability. I have a 22-year-old daughter who is the oldest of 10 children. So she was mature at 2. She talked like an older kid. She's graduating from Marian College with a nursing degree that she got a full scholarship for. My daughter, Kate, she is studying literature at Taylor University. And she's a very bright kid, very responsible. And believe it or not, she just announced that she was voted president of all ethnic groups in the campus. Fascinating. Anyway, she got a free ride at Taylor. My son Caleb, he's graduating next week, and he from high school, and he's been granted a full scholarship at Rose-Hulman in engineering.